The gunshot echoed through Circleville's dusty Main Street, and Ryder Jameson didn't even flinch as the bullet buried itself in the post 3 inches from his head. His gray eyes, cold as winter steel, fixed on the drunk cowhand who was already fumbling to reload, hands shaking so badly the cartridges kept slipping through his fingers. Ryder's own Colt remained holstered. He simply stared, that infamous dead-eyed look that had earned him a reputation across Utah territory as the coldest man to ever wear a badge. The drunk dropped his gun and ran. Ryder bent down, picked up the weapon, and walked toward the sheriff's office without a word to the crowd that had gathered. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody ever did unless absolutely necessary. It was late April in 1882, and Circleville had been his station for 3 years now. 3 years of silence, of keeping the peace with nothing more than his presence and his reputation. The townspeople whispered about him constantly. Some said he'd lost his family to Comanche raiders. Others claimed he'd killed his own brother in a duel over a woman. A few insisted he simply had no heart at all, that he'd been born without the capacity for human feeling. Ryder never confirmed or denied anything. He simply existed, moving through his days like a shadow, his face an unchanging mask of granite indifference. The sheriff's office was quiet when he entered. Sheriff Dalton looked up from his desk, saw Ryder holding the drunk's gun, and sighed. "Patterson again. He'll sleep it off in a cell." Ryder's voice was flat, emotionless. He placed the weapon on the desk and turned to leave. "Ryder, wait." Dalton stood, running a hand through his graying hair. "We're expecting someone tomorrow, a schoolteacher from back east, young woman traveling alone. Her name's Zelda Winchester. She'll be on the afternoon stage." Ryder said nothing, waiting. "I need you to make sure she gets to the boarding house safely. Mrs. Abernathy has a room prepared for her." A slight nod was Ryder's only response. He walked out into the afternoon sun, pulling his hat low over his eyes. A schoolteacher. Circleville had been trying to establish a proper school for 2 years, but no teacher lasted more than a few months. The isolation, the roughness of frontier life, the loneliness, it all drove them back east eventually. This one would be no different, he figured. The next afternoon, Ryder stood in the shade of the general store's awning, watching the stage roll in. Dust billowed up around the wheels as the driver pulled the horses to a halt. 2 passengers disembarked, both men, both locals returning from Salt Lake City. Ryder was about to turn away, assuming the schoolteacher had changed her mind, when a slender hand appeared in the doorway, followed by a young woman in a traveling dress the color of sage. She stepped down with the help of the driver, and Ryder found himself studying her with more attention than he'd given anything in years. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with dark auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet. Her face was dusted with freckles, and even from a distance, he could see the determination in her green eyes as she surveyed her new home. "Miss Winchester," he approached, his voice carrying across the space between them. She turned, and her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him. 6 feet 3 inches of lean muscle, all dressed in black except for the silver badge on his chest. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, no softness anywhere. Most women looked away quickly when they met his gaze. This one held it. "Deputy Jameson, I presume." "Sheriff Dalton mentioned you in his correspondence." She extended her hand. "A pleasure to meet you." He shook her hand briefly, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "I'll take you to the boarding house." "I have a trunk," she said, gesturing to the stage. He retrieved it without a word, hefting the heavy trunk onto his shoulder as though it weighed nothing. She followed him through town, her boots clicking on the wooden sidewalks. He could feel the townspeople watching, staring at the new arrival. Circleville wasn't used to refined Eastern women. The boarding house was a two-story structure at the end of Main Street, run by Mrs. Abernathy, a widow who took in boarders to make ends meet. Ryder carried the trunk up to the second floor, to the small but clean room that would be Zelda's home. He set it down near the window and turned to leave. "Deputy Jameson," he paused in the doorway, "thank you for your help. I hope we'll become friends during my time here." Her smile was genuine, warm. Ryder looked at her for a long moment, his expression unchanged. "You won't last 3 months," he said, then walked out. If his words stung her, she didn't show it the next morning when she appeared at the newly constructed schoolhouse, a small building that still smelled of fresh pine. Ryder happened to be passing by on his rounds when he saw her struggling with the door, which had swollen in its frame. He watched for a moment as she pushed and pulled, her face growing red with effort. "Step back," he said. She jumped, not having heard his approach. He put his shoulder to the door and shoved hard. It gave way with a groan, swinging open to reveal a single room with rough-hewn benches and a blackboard that had seen better days. "Oh my," Zelda said, stepping inside. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. The floor was dirty, there were cobwebs in every corner, and the blackboard was so faded it was nearly white. "Well, I suppose I have my work cut out for me." Ryder expected her to cry or complain or storm off to demand better accommodations. Instead, she set down her bag, rolled up her sleeves, and began to sweep. He found himself standing in the doorway, watching her work. She hummed as she swept, some tune he didn't recognize, her movements efficient and purposeful. When she reached for a rag to wipe down the benches, he cleared his throat. "There's a well behind the building," he said. "Would you be so kind as to fetch me some water, deputy?" She smiled at him, that same warm smile from yesterday. He should have said no. He should have walked away. Instead, he found himself drawing bucket after bucket of water for her throughout the morning. She scrubbed every surface, washed the windows until they gleamed, and even managed to restore some darkness to the blackboard with a mixture she concocted from coal dust and water. By noon, the schoolhouse was transformed. Zelda stood in the center of the room, hands on her hips, surveying her work with satisfaction. A smudge of dirt marked her cheek, and strands of hair had escaped her careful pins, but her eyes were bright with accomplishment. "Much better," she declared. "Now it's ready for children." "You're teaching your first lesson tomorrow," Ryder said. It wasn't a question. "I am. Are there many children in Circleville?" 15 or so of school age. Half won't come. Their families need them for chores. "Then I'll teach the half that does come and hope the others join us eventually." She looked at him directly. "You haven't smiled once since I arrived, Deputy Jameson. Is it because you disapprove of me, or is that simply your nature?" The question was forward, almost inappropriate, but her tone was curious rather than confrontational. Ryder felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. "I don't smile," he said simply. "Everyone smiles, deputy, even if only occasionally, not me, not in a long time." She studied him with those intelligent green eyes, and he had the uncomfortable sensation that she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. "How long?" 12 years. The words came out before he could stop them. He never talked about himself, never revealed anything personal. Yet here he was, answering this woman's questions like she had some right to know his secrets. "That's a long time to carry whatever burden you're carrying," she said softly. Then, before he could respond, she picked up her bag and walked to the door. "Thank you for your help today, deputy. I appreciate it more than you know." She left him standing in the schoolhouse, feeling more unsettled than he had in years. The next several days followed a strange pattern. Ryder found himself passing by the schoolhouse more frequently than his duties required. He told himself he was simply keeping an eye on the new teacher, making sure she was safe. But the truth, which he refused to acknowledge even to himself, was that he was drawn to the sound of her voice drifting through the open windows as she taught her students. She made learning sound like an adventure. She told stories that brought history to life, worked through arithmetic problems with patience and humor, and encouraged even the shyest children to read aloud. One afternoon, he was standing outside the schoolhouse when he heard laughter. Children's laughter, bright and innocent, but underneath it, another sound. A woman's laugh, full and unrestrained, bubbling up like water from a spring. He moved closer to the window without thinking and looked inside. Zelda was standing at the front of the class, holding up a drawing one of the younger children had made. It was supposed to be a horse, but it looked more like a dog with extremely long legs. She wasn't mocking the child's effort. Instead, she was laughing with pure delight at the creativity of it, and the child was laughing too, proud rather than embarrassed. "Oh, Billy," she said, catching her breath. "This is wonderful. You've given him legs tall enough to step right over a fence. That's a very clever horse indeed." The children giggled, and Zelda's laugh rang out again. It was, Ryder thought, the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. It was completely unguarded, full of genuine joy and warmth, the kind of laugh that invited you to join in even if you didn't understand the joke. Something happened to his face. He felt it, a strange pulling sensation in muscles that hadn't moved in over a decade. The corners of his mouth twitched, then lifted. His cheeks rose. His eyes crinkled at the corners. He was smiling. Actually smiling. A full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face from cold granite into something warm and human. "Deputy Jameson, are you feeling all right?" He spun around to find Mrs. Abernathy standing behind him, her market basket over her arm, staring at him with wide eyes. "Fine," he said quickly, the smile vanishing as fast as it had appeared. "I declare I thought my eyes were deceiving me. I've lived in this town for 20 years, and I've never seen you so much as crack a grin." She peered at him with concern. "Are you running a fever?" I said, "I'm fine." He turned and walked away quickly, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion, and everything to do with the realization that Zelda Winchester had just shattered something inside him, some carefully constructed wall that had kept him safe and separate from the world. He avoided her for the next 3 days, taking his rounds at different times, eating at the saloon instead of the boarding house dining room where he usually took his meals. But Circleville was a small town, and avoidance could only last so long. On Saturday evening, there was a dance at the community hall. Ryder normally avoided such gatherings, but Sheriff Dalton had asked him to be present in case any of the young cowhands got rowdy. He stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching couples twirl across the floor to the music of a fiddle, a banjo, and an old piano that was only slightly out of tune. Zelda arrived with Mrs. Abernathy, wearing a dress of deep blue that brought out the green in her eyes. She was immediately surrounded by young men asking for a dance. Ryder watched as she accepted, laughing and chatting easily with each partner. She had an effortless way with people, making everyone feel comfortable and valued. It was a gift he'd never possessed, not even before he'd built his walls. "You could ask her to dance, you know." Sheriff Dalton had materialized beside him, instead of glowering in the corner like a thundercloud. "I don't dance. I'm sure you used to once upon a time." Ryder said nothing. He had danced, actually, a lifetime ago when he was a different person. When he'd been young and foolish enough to believe in happiness. "She's a good woman," Dalton continued. "Exactly what this town needs. Smart, kind, patient. Several of the young men are already half in love with her. That statement sent an unexpected jolt through Ryder's chest. Jealousy. He recognized it, even though he hadn't felt it in years. He had no claim on Zelda Winchester, no right to feel anything about who she danced with or who courted her. The song ended, and Zelda's partner, young Tommy Fletcher from the feed store, led her back to her seat. Before another man could approach, Ryder found himself crossing the room. He stopped in front of her and held out his hand. "Would you dance with me, Miss Winchester?" The entire room seemed to go quiet. Heads turned. Whispers started. The cold deputy was asking someone to dance. It was unprecedented. Zelda looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face, then smiled. "I'd be delighted, Deputy Jameson." She placed her hand in his, and he led her to the floor. The musicians struck up a waltz, and Ryder placed his other hand at her waist, feeling the warmth of her even through the layers of fabric. They began to move, and he discovered that his body still remembered the steps, even if his heart had forgotten how to feel the music. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me," Zelda said quietly, looking up at him. "I was. May I ask why? Because you make me feel things I haven't felt in a very long time, and I'm not certain I want to feel them." The honesty of his own words surprised him. Her expression softened. "What happened 12 years ago, Ryder? What took your smile away?" He'd never told anyone in Circleville the truth. They had their theories and rumors, but he'd never confirmed or denied any of them. Yet as he looked into Zelda's open, honest face, he found himself wanting to tell her. Needing to tell her. "I was 20 years old," he said slowly. "Engaged to be married to a girl named Sarah. We were planning a life together, had a piece of land picked out, everything arranged. 2 weeks before the wedding, there was an outbreak of cholera in our town in Missouri. Sarah got sick. She died within 3 days. My mother and younger sister died too. My father lasted a week before he followed them." Zelda's hand tightened on his. "Oh, Ryder, I'm so sorry." "I buried them all within 10 days. Then I packed up what little was left and headed west. Figured if I didn't let myself feel anything, it couldn't hurt anymore. And it worked for 12 years. Until you arrived in Circleville and laughed in that schoolhouse. And you smiled," she said softly. "I saw you through the window. You were watching me teach and you smiled. I've been hoping to see it again. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I remember how. You already did it once. That means you can do it again." She leaned slightly closer as they danced. "You don't have to carry your grief alone anymore, Ryder. You've mourned long enough. Sarah wouldn't have wanted you to stop living. You didn't know her." "No, but I know that anyone who loved you would want you to be happy, would want you to have a full life, not this half-existence you've been maintaining." The song ended, but Ryder didn't immediately release her. They stood in the middle of the dance floor, looking at each other while other couples moved around them. Something passed between them in that moment, some understanding, some connection that went deeper than words. "Walk with me," he said. She nodded, and they left the dance together, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed them out. The night air was cool and clean, full of sage and distant pine. They walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the sky opened up above them, brilliant with stars. "I came west to escape something too," Zelda said after a while. "Not death, but expectations. My father wanted me to marry a banker's son in Philadelphia. A good match," he said. "Respectable. Safe. But I didn't love him and he didn't love me. We would have had a perfectly acceptable, perfectly miserable life together. So I applied for teaching positions as far from Philadelphia as I could get. When Circleville wrote back, I packed my trunk and left without telling my family. I sent a letter from the train station explaining where I was going and why. Do you regret it? Not for a moment. I'd rather live on my own terms and face uncertainty than spend my life in a comfortable cage." She looked up at him. "You understand that, don't you? That's why you came west too, not just to escape grief, but to escape the person you would have become if you'd stayed." He did understand, more than he wanted to admit. They walked in companionable silence until they reached a small rise that overlooked the town. Circleville was spread out below them, lights glowing in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked peaceful, settled, like a place where people could build lives. "Tell me something happy," Zelda said suddenly. "From before. Tell me about something that made you smile back when you still smiled." Ryder was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My sister Emma. She was 10 years younger than me, just 8 years old when she died. She used to follow me everywhere, chattering constantly about everything and nothing. She'd make up songs about whatever we were doing. Feeding the chickens, mucking out stalls, everything got a song. They were terrible songs, completely nonsensical, but she sang them with such conviction that you couldn't help but laugh. She sounds wonderful. She was. She made everything better just by being there." His voice roughened. "After she died, the silence was unbearable. That's when I realized I needed to leave. I couldn't stay in a place that was so quiet when it used to be so full of her noise." Zelda slipped her hand into his. Her palm was warm and small against his calloused skin. "Thank you for telling me about her, for sharing that with me." "Why does it matter to you?" he asked. "Why do you care whether I smile or not? You barely know me." "Because I see who you could be, underneath all that ice. I see a good man who's been hurting for a very long time, and I think that man deserves a chance to live again. Truly live, not just exist." She turned to face him fully. "And because, if I'm being completely honest, I find myself becoming quite fond of you, Deputy Jameson, even when you're scowling at everyone and speaking in monosyllables." Something warm unfurled in Ryder's chest, like a flower that had been waiting 12 years for sunlight. "I'm fond of you too," he said, the words feeling strange and wonderful in his mouth. "More than fond. You terrify me, Zelda Winchester. You make me want things I thought I'd given up forever." "What kind of things?" "A future. A reason to come home at the end of the day, someone to talk to who actually understands what I'm saying, someone who makes me remember that I'm alive." Her smile could have lit up the entire valley. "Those don't sound like terrifying things to me. They sound like wonderful things. I don't know how to do this anymore," he admitted. "I don't know how to court someone, how to be anything other than what I've been for 12 years. Then we'll figure it out together. There's no rush, no expectations. We'll simply spend time together and see where it leads us." She squeezed his hand. "But I should warn you, Ryder Jameson, I'm a very determined woman. If I've decided you're worth the effort, I won't give up easily." For the second time in 12 years, Ryder felt his face change. The smile came easier this time, less unfamiliar. It felt like remembering a language he used to speak fluently. "I'm beginning to understand that about you." They walked back to town hand in hand, and when he left her at Mrs. Abernathy's door, he found himself reluctant to let go. She seemed to feel the same way, lingering on the porch. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Perhaps we could have a picnic after church services. I'd like that. Then it's a date, Deputy." She leaned forward and kissed his cheek. So quickly he barely registered it before she'd slipped inside and closed the door. Ryder stood on the porch for a full minute, his hand pressed to his cheek where her lips had touched. Then he walked back to his small house behind the sheriff's office, feeling lighter than he had in over a decade. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Ryder attended the church service, something he usually skipped, and sat in the back pew where he could watch Zelda sing hymns with Mrs. Abernathy. Her voice was clear and sweet, and she sang with the same wholehearted enthusiasm she brought to everything else in her life. After the service, they gathered food from Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen and walked out to a spot Ryder knew, a meadow about a mile from town where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, and a small creek provided cool water and the sound of running water. Zelda spread a blanket while Ryder unpacked the basket. "Tell me about being a deputy," she said as they ate cold chicken and fresh bread. "Do you enjoy the work?" "I'm good at it," he said. "Whether I enjoy it or not has never seemed relevant. But do you? Enjoy it, I mean." He considered the question seriously. "I like maintaining order. I like knowing that people can sleep safely because I'm doing my job. I don't like the violence, but it's necessary sometimes." "Have you ever thought about doing something else?" "Like what?" "I don't know. Ranching, farming, running a business." "I have land," he admitted. "About 100 acres just north of here. I bought it when I first came to Circleville, thinking I might build something eventually, but I've never gotten around to it. It just sits there, empty." "Why did you buy it if you didn't plan to use it?" "Because some small part of me still wanted to believe in a future, I suppose, even if I couldn't imagine what that future might look like." He looked at her. "I can imagine it now, though, since you arrived." She blushed, the color rising prettily in her cheeks. "What do you imagine?" "A house on that land, horses, maybe some cattle, a garden, a life that's more than just keeping the peace in someone else's town." He hesitated, then added, "Someone to share it with." "That sounds lovely." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "My contract with the school board is for 1 year. After that, I can choose to renew or move on. I thought when I came here that I'd probably move on, try different places, have adventures. But now I'm thinking Circleville might be exactly where I want to stay. Because of the teaching, because of you." She met his eyes directly. "I know we've only known each other for 2 weeks, Ryder, but I feel something with you that I've never felt before. Like I've been looking for you my whole life without even knowing it." He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I feel it too. Like you've woken up something inside me that I thought was dead. Like I'm finally taking a real breath after years of barely breathing." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "Kiss me, Ryder." He did. Slowly, carefully, as though she were something precious and fragile that might break if he wasn't gentle enough. Her lips were soft and warm, and when she sighed against his mouth, he felt something crack open inside him. A dam breaking, 12 years of held-back emotion suddenly flooding through him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zelda was smiling. "Now that," she said, "was worth waiting for," he laughed. Actually laughed, the sound rusty and strange but real. Zelda's eyes widened. "Do that again." "What?" "Laugh. Smile. Show me that the cold cowboy everyone in town fears is actually just a man who forgot how to be happy." He smiled, easier this time, and pulled her close. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and kissing and making plans that felt both terrifying and wonderful. When they returned to town as the sun was setting, everyone who saw them stared. Ryder Jameson was smiling. The world had clearly gone mad. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Ryder had forgotten was possible. He and Zelda spent every free moment together. He would stop by the schoolhouse during her lunch break, and they'd eat together while she told him about her students' progress. She would meet him after his evening rounds, and they'd walk through town, talking about everything and nothing. On Sundays, they'd ride out to his land and make plans for the house they'd build, the life they'd create. The transformation in Ryder was remarkable. He still did his job with the same quiet efficiency, but now there was warmth beneath the competence. He smiled at children. He made small talk with shopkeepers. He became, gradually, a real member of the community instead of just its silent protector. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Dalton said one afternoon in early July. They were in the office, and Ryder was actually humming as he cleaned his gun. "You're like a different person." "I feel like a different person," Ryder admitted. "Like I've been sleepwalking for 12 years and I've finally woken up." "You going to marry that girl?" "If she'll have me, yes, she'll have you. Anyone with eyes can see how she looks at you." Dalton leaned back in his chair. "For what it's worth, I'm happy for you both." "You deserve some happiness, Ryder. God knows you've earned it." That evening, Ryder rode out to his land alone. He wanted to see it with fresh eyes, to imagine it as it would be rather than as it was. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The land rolled gently, good grass for grazing, clusters of trees that would provide shade, and a natural spring that bubbled up near what he'd already decided would be the perfect spot for the house. He could see it so clearly now. A sturdy ranch house with a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings, a barn for horses, corrals for cattle, a garden where Zelda could grow vegetables and flowers, a future that was real and possible and right there within his grasp if he was brave enough to reach for it. He was on his way back to town when he heard the gunshots, 3 rapid cracks that echoed across the valley, coming from the direction of Circleville. Ryder urged his horse into a gallop, his heart pounding. The shots had come from near the center of town, possibly from the main street itself. When he arrived, he found chaos. A group of men were riding hard out of town, heading south. Sheriff Dalton was on the ground in front of the bank, bleeding from a shoulder wound. And Zelda was standing in the schoolhouse doorway, her face pale but determined, a fireplace poker gripped in both hands. Ryder dismounted in a single fluid motion and ran to her. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. They tried to rob the bank. The sheriff confronted them and they shot him. I was closing up the schoolhouse when I heard the commotion. I thought they might come after witnesses, so I grabbed the poker. But they just rode off." Ryder wanted to pull her into his arms and never let go, but Dalton needed help. He turned to find Doc Harrison already kneeling beside the sheriff examining the wound. "How bad?" Ryder asked. "He'll live. Bullet went clean through the shoulder. Missed anything vital." Doc Harrison looked up. "But those men need to be caught before they hurt someone else." "I'll ride after them," Ryder said immediately. "Not alone, you won't." Zelda's voice was firm. "Wait until morning, gather a posse. Going after them alone in the dark is suicide." "She's right," Dalton said through gritted teeth as Doc started bandaging him. "They'll camp for the night somewhere. You can pick up their trail at first light." Ryder knew they were right, but every instinct he had screamed at him to pursue immediately. These men had threatened his town, had hurt his friend, had fired guns near Zelda. They needed to pay for that, but he forced himself to think rationally. A lone rider in the dark would be easy to ambush. A posse in daylight would have much better odds of success. "First light," he agreed. "I'll round up some men tonight." By morning he had a posse of 6, including himself, all good riders, all steady in a crisis. They picked up the outlaws' trail easily, following it south through increasingly rough terrain. The outlaws were making for the high country, probably hoping to lose pursuit in the canyons and mesas. They caught up to the gang 3 days later in a narrow canyon. There was a brief firefight, sharp and brutal. When it was over, 3 of the outlaws were dead, 2 were wounded and in custody, and 1 had escaped into the rocks. Ryder wanted to pursue, but his men were exhausted. The wounded needed medical attention, and they were running low on supplies. They returned to Circleville with their prisoners, riding into town on the afternoon of the 4th day. Zelda was waiting for him on the porch of Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. She ran to him as soon as she saw him, and he caught her up in his arms, holding her tight. "I was so worried," she said into his chest. "Every night you were gone, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of all the terrible things that could happen. I'm fine. We're all fine. It's over." He pulled back to look at her face. "But it made me realize something, Zelda. Life is short and uncertain. We don't have the luxury of taking our time with what matters. So I need to ask you something, and I need to ask it now." She looked up at him, her green eyes wide. "What?" He took both her hands in his. "Zelda Winchester, I know we've only known each other for 3 months. I know conventional wisdom says we should wait longer, be more certain. But I've already wasted 12 years of my life being too afraid to feel anything, and I don't want to waste another moment. I love you. I love your laugh and your determination, and the way you make everything better just by being there. I love how you see the best in everyone, including me. I love the future I can finally see when I look at you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, that brilliant smile that had changed his whole world. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Ryder Jameson, I will absolutely marry you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. But it's the good kind of scared, the kind that means something real and important is happening." He kissed her there in the middle of Main Street, in front of half the town, and he didn't care who saw or what they thought. When they finally broke apart, there was spontaneous applause from the gathered crowd. Even Sheriff Dalton, his arm still in a sling, was grinning. They were married 6 weeks later in the same church where Ryder had watched Zelda sing hymns. She wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Abernathy and the other women in town had helped her sew. Ryder wore his best suit, the one he'd bought when he first became a deputy and had never had occasion to wear. Sheriff Dalton stood as his best man, and Mrs. Abernathy stood with Zelda. As Ryder spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish this remarkable woman for the rest of his life, he felt the last of the ice around his heart melt away completely. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, his smile was so wide it made his face ache. But it was a good ache, the ache of muscles that were finally being used the way they were meant to be used. The reception was held at the community hall, the same place where they'd first danced together. There was food and music and dancing that went on late into the night. Ryder danced with his wife, amazed that he could think of her that way, amazed that this was his life now. "Happy?" Zelda asked as they swayed together. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he said honestly. "You gave me my life back, Zelda. You gave me a reason to feel again." "You gave me something too," she said. "A home, a place where I belong, someone who loves me for who I am, not who I'm supposed to be." They spent their wedding night in the small house behind the sheriff's office, but it was a temporary arrangement. Ryder had hired a crew to start building on his land, and the house was already taking shape. By October it was finished, a solid structure with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and that wide porch he'd imagined. Moving into the house felt like the final piece clicking into place. This was their home, built on land they owned, a foundation for the life they were creating together. Zelda quit her teaching position, much to the disappointment of her students, but she promised to continue tutoring any children who wanted extra help. "I want to focus on building our home," she explained to Ryder, "on helping you get the ranch established, and someday on raising our own children." Ryder had thought he couldn't be any happier, but that statement proved him wrong. The idea of children, of tiny humans who were part him and part Zelda, made his chest tight with emotion. "How many children are we talking about?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She laughed, that glorious laugh that had started this whole transformation. "As many as God sees fit to bless us with. Is that all right with you?" "More than all right. Perfect, actually." He'd resigned as deputy by then, turning over his badge to a younger man who'd been training under him. Sheriff Dalton had accepted his resignation with good grace. "You've earned a peaceful life, Ryder. Go build your ranch. Be happy with that wife of yours. You've certainly paid your dues." The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Ryder bought cattle and horses, built up their herds gradually. Zelda proved to have a natural way with animals, and she also established a vegetable garden that produced more than they could eat themselves. They sold the surplus in town, building up a reputation for quality. By the spring of 1884, their first child was on the way. Ryder was terrified when Zelda told him, memories of cholera and death flooding back. But Zelda took his face in her hands and made him look at her. "I'm healthy and strong, and Doc Harrison is one of the best physicians in the territory. Nothing is going to happen to me, Ryder. I'm going to be fine, and our baby is going to be fine, and you're going to be an amazing father." He wanted to believe her, but the fear lingered throughout her pregnancy. Every time she looked tired or felt a little off, his heart would race with panic. Zelda bore his overprotectiveness with patience, understanding that it came from love and old wounds that hadn't quite healed. When she went into labor on a warm July evening, Ryder was certain he was going to lose his mind. Doc Harrison and Mrs. Abernathy were with Zelda in their bedroom while he paced the kitchen, wearing a path in the floorboards. Every cry from upstairs made him want to burst through the door, even though he knew he'd just be in the way. Finally, after what felt like days but was actually only 8 hours, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, high and indignant. Moments later, Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the top of the stairs, beaming. "You have a son, Deputy Jameson, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife is doing wonderfully." Ryder took the stairs 3 at a time. Zelda was propped up against pillows, sweaty and exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up when he entered, and her smile made his heart turn over. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket. The baby's eyes were scrunched shut, his fists waving indignantly. He had a shock of dark hair, and even at just a few minutes old, a determined expression that reminded Ryder of Zelda. "He's perfect," Ryder whispered, afraid to speak too loudly, afraid to break this fragile, precious moment. "You're perfect. I can't believe he's real, that this is real." "Believe it," Zelda said. "This is our life, Ryder, our family, and it's only going to get better from here." They named him Robert, after Ryder's father, with the middle name Thomas, after Zelda's grandfather. Little Robert was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to find everything about the world fascinating. Ryder had never imagined he could love another person as much as he loved Zelda, but his son proved him wrong. The fierce, protective love he felt for this tiny human amazed and humbled him. The years flowed past like the creek on their property, steady and constant and good. Robert grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child. 2 years after Robert's birth, Zelda gave them a daughter whom they named Rose. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had Ryder wrapped completely around her tiny finger. "You're spoiling her," Zelda would say, watching Ryder carry 4-year-old Rose around on his shoulders while Robert ran ahead, pretending to be a wild Mustang. "I'm making up for lost time," Ryder would reply. "I have years of smiling and laughing and being happy to catch up on. My children are going to know joy every day of their lives if I have anything to say about it." Another son came 2 years later, William, and then another daughter, Emma, named for Ryder's long-lost sister. Emma had Sarah's birthday, which Ryder took as a sign that his first love approved of the life he'd built, that she was happy he'd finally found his way back to living. The ranch prospered. They expanded their land, hired a few ranch hands to help with the work, and became one of the more successful operations in the region. But success wasn't measured just in cattle and land for Ryder and Zelda. It was measured in dinner-table conversations full of laughter, in bedtime stories and good-night kisses, in watching their children grow and learn and become their own people. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder and Zelda rode out to the spot by the creek where they'd had their first picnic. The children were spending the night with Mrs. Abernathy, who doted on them shamelessly. Zelda spread the same blanket they'd used all those years ago, now faded and patched but still serviceable. "You ever regret it?" Ryder asked as they lay side by side, looking up at the stars. Leaving Philadelphia, coming to this rough frontier town, marrying a broken-down deputy with too much baggage. "Not for a single moment," Zelda said firmly. She rolled onto her side to face him. "You weren't broken, Ryder. You were grieving and you'd forgotten how to stop. All I did was remind you that life was still worth living. You did so much more than that. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning grateful instead of just going through the motions." He touched her face gently. "I spent 12 years convinced I'd never smile again, never feel anything but cold numbness. And then I heard you laugh and everything changed. My whole face changed. My whole life changed." "Your whole face definitely changed," Zelda agreed, smiling. "From terrifying to tender in about 3 seconds flat. Mrs. Abernathy still talks about seeing you smile for the first time. She thought you'd been replaced by an imposter." He laughed, the sound coming easily now, as natural as breathing. "I love you, Zelda Jameson. More today than the day we married, and I'll love you even more tomorrow. And I love you, my no longer cold cowboy. Thank you for taking a chance on happiness. Thank you for letting me in." They stayed by the creek until the moon rose high overhead, talking and kissing and remembering the journey that had brought them to this moment. When they finally rode back to the ranch house, Ryder found himself thinking about how much can change in a decade. How a man who was certain he'd never feel anything again could end up with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. The years continued their steady march. The children grew, Robert showing a natural talent for ranching, Rose revealing a gift for music that amazed everyone, William developing his mother's love of books and learning, and Emma proving to be fearless and adventurous, always exploring and asking questions. When Robert was 17, he asked his father how he and his mother had fallen in love. They were mending fence together, a father-son task they'd shared countless times over the years. Ryder paused, hammer in hand, and looked at his eldest son. "I heard her laugh," he said simply. "I'd spent 12 years being cold and closed off, refusing to feel anything because feeling meant hurting. And then your mother arrived in Circleville, and I heard her laugh while she was teaching school, and something inside me just cracked wide open. I smiled for the first time in over a decade, and my whole face changed. My whole life changed." "Just like that?" Robert asked skeptically. "Just from hearing someone laugh?" "It wasn't the laugh itself," Ryder tried to explain. "It was what the laugh represented: joy, life, the possibility of happiness. Your mother reminded me that the world still had beauty in it, that I could still feel things if I was brave enough to try. She saved me, in every way a person can be saved." Robert was quiet for a moment, then said, "I hope I find something like that someday." "What you and Ma have, I mean." "You will," Ryder assured him. "When you least expect it, probably. That's how the best things in life usually work." By the time Ryder turned 50 in 1894, his hair was more gray than brown, and his face showed lines earned from years of honest work and genuine smiles. His children were grown, or nearly so. Robert was married himself, living on a portion of the ranch with his wife, a kind young woman named Lucy. Rose had moved to Salt Lake City to study music. William was considering medical school, inspired by Doc Harrison's years of service to Circleville. And Emma, at 16, was already turning heads and breaking hearts all over the territory. Zelda's hair had threads of silver running through the auburn now, and there were fine lines around her eyes and mouth. But to Ryder, she was as beautiful as the day she'd stepped off that stage in 1882, maybe more so because of all the years and experiences that had deepened and enriched her beauty. They still rode out to the creek sometimes, just the two of them, to remember and to dream. They'd built a good life, a life neither of them would change for anything. The ranch was prosperous, their children were healthy and happy, and they had friends and community all around them. You ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't come to Circleville? Zelda asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. I try not to, Ryder admitted. Because the answer is probably that I'd still be that cold, closed-off deputy, existing but not really living. You changed everything, Zelda. You gave me back my humanity. We saved each other, she corrected. I was running from a life I didn't want, and you gave me a life I could never have imagined. We were both lost, just in different ways. We found each other at exactly the right moment. As twilight deepened and the first stars appeared, Ryder pulled his wife close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against his side. Their children's voices drifted from inside the house, arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. The cattle were settled for the night, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. This was what happiness looked like, Ryder thought. Not a single moment of perfect joy, but rather a life built steadily over years, full of ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. It was laughter and hard work, tears and triumphs, disappointments overcome and dreams achieved. It was the simple miracle of waking up next to the person you loved and knowing you'd get to do it again tomorrow. Tell me something, Zelda said softly. After all these years, after everything we've been through together, what's the best part of your life? Ryder thought about it carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. Every morning, he finally said, I wake up and see you beside me, and I smile. I still can't quite believe sometimes that this is real, that you're real, that this life is actually mine. The cold cowboy who never smiled until he saw you laugh has been smiling every single day for 14 years now, and he plans to keep smiling for the rest of his life. That's the best part. Not the ranch or the success, or even the wonderful children we've raised together. It's simply that you taught me how to be alive again, and I get to spend every day being grateful for that gift. Tears shimmered in Zelda's eyes. That's the most beautiful thing you've ever said to me. It's the truth. You changed everything, Zelda. My whole face changed when I saw you laugh. My whole heart changed when I fell in love with you. My whole life changed when you agreed to marry me, and I wouldn't trade a single moment of it for anything in the world. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held all the years they'd shared and all the years still to come. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, those genuine, heartfelt smiles that came from deep contentment and abiding love. The years ahead would bring more changes. Grandchildren would arrive, filling the ranch house with new laughter and new adventures. There would be challenges and sorrows, because that was the nature of life. But there would also be joy and triumph, because that too was life's nature. And through it all, Ryder and Zelda would face everything together, partners in the truest sense of the word. Robert and Lucy gave them their first grandchild in 1895, a boy they named Ryder Thomas. Holding his grandson for the first time, Ryder felt the circle complete itself somehow. This tiny person represented the future, the continuation of everything he and Zelda had built together. He looked up to find Zelda watching him with shining eyes. "He has your nose," she said. "Poor child," Ryder replied, but he was grinning. "He'll grow into it just like I did." More grandchildren followed as their other children married and started families of their own. Rose married a music teacher from Salt Lake City and had 3 daughters who all inherited her musical gifts. William did become a doctor and married a nurse he met during his training. They settled in Circleville, taking over for the aging Doc Harrison, and had 2 sons who kept the whole family on their toes. Emma, true to her adventurous nature, married a surveyor who took her all over the West, and she wrote long, entertaining letters home about their travels. As Ryder and Zelda grew older, they gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Robert, while they enjoyed a quieter pace of life. They spent their days doing what they loved, tending Zelda's garden, riding out to check on the herds, sitting on the porch in the evenings telling stories to whichever grandchildren happened to be visiting. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were over 30 people present, from newborn babies to grown children with families of their own. The house rang with laughter and conversation, exactly the kind of joyful noise that Ryder had once thought he'd never experience again. As the party wound down and people began saying their goodbyes, Ryder found a quiet moment alone with Zelda in the garden. She was examining her roses, the same variety she'd planted when they first moved into the house, now established and blooming profusely. "Thank you," he said. She looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For everything. For coming to Circleville. For seeing past the cold exterior to the person I used to be, the person I could be again. For loving me even when I didn't know how to love myself. For giving me this life." He gestured to encompass the house, the ranch, their family gathered inside. "I was dead inside for 12 years, Zelda. You brought me back to life. We brought each other to life," she said, just as she had all those years ago. "I needed you just as much as you needed me. We were each other's salvation." They stood together in the garden as the sun set, hands clasped, hearts full. The cold cowboy who never smiled had been gone for so long that most people didn't even remember he'd existed. In his place was a man who smiled freely, who laughed often, who loved deeply and without reservation. A man who'd learned that grief didn't have to be forever, that hearts could heal, and that happiness was always possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. As night fell and stars appeared overhead, Ryder and Zelda walked back to the house hand in hand. Inside, their family was waiting, their legacy of love made manifest in the faces of their children and grandchildren. It was everything Ryder had thought he'd lost forever when Sarah and his family died all those years ago. But Zelda had taught him something important, something he'd never forgotten and never would forget. Love didn't end. It transformed. The love he'd felt for Sarah and his first family had been real and precious, and losing them had nearly destroyed him. But that love hadn't disappeared. It had simply been waiting, dormant like seeds in winter, until Zelda arrived and brought the warmth of spring with her. She'd helped those seeds grow into something new and beautiful, something that honored the past while embracing the future. His whole face had changed when he saw her laugh. But more than that, his whole heart had changed. His whole life had changed. And as he looked around at the life they'd built together, the family they'd created, the love they'd shared for 25 years and counting, Ryder knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man who'd ever lived. The cold cowboy was gone forever, replaced by a man who understood that love was the most powerful force in the world. It could break you, yes, but it could also heal you. It could bring you to your knees, but it could also lift you up higher than you'd ever imagined possible. And when you found the right person to share it with, someone who understood you and challenged you and made you want to be better, someone whose laugh could change your whole face and whose love could change your whole life, well, that was worth more than all the gold in California or all the cattle in Texas. That was worth everything. And as Ryder Jameson closed the door on another perfect day in a life full of them, with his wife by his side and his family surrounding him, he smiled that smile that had taken 12 years and one remarkable woman to find again. It was the smile of a man who'd walked through darkness and come out into the light, who'd learned that endings could become beginnings, and who discovered that the human heart had an infinite capacity for love if only you had the courage to open it up and let someone in. The cold cowboy had become a warm-hearted husband, father and grandfather, and he wouldn't have had it any other way.